We're going to factor a polynomial, and we're going to use a graphing calculator table to verify our work. So I'm going to try to factor 10x squared plus 4x minus 6. And if we recall the steps in order to factor, the first thing we should do is factor out the greatest common factor. So when I look at this problem, I notice that each number is even. So a 2 will factor out. When I factor a 2 out of the first term, I'll be left with 5x squared. Out of the second term, I'll be left with a 2x, and out of the third term, I'll be left with a 3, and I could check that by distributing the 2 back in and verifying that I'll get back to this original equation. Then I need to factor this polynomial, 5x squared plus 2x plus 3. And I'm going to use the AC method. The AC method says I take the first coefficient, A, times the last coefficient, or C, and that'll be negative 15. And I look for two factors of negative 15 that will add to 2. And I'm going to use the graphing calculator to help me do that. So the first thing I'd like to do is find a list of all the factors of negative 15. So in order to do that, I'm going to go to my y equals. So I click y equals, and I'm at the y1 graph, and I'm going to type 15, actually negative 15, because negative 3 times 5 is negative 15. And I'm going to hit divided by x, because the factors of 15 are the numbers that go into it evenly, like 3 is a factor of 15. And then I'm going to go to second, and hit the graph button, which opens my table of values. And I notice I can't have a 0, I get an arrow because I can't divide by negative 15. And these are the factors of negative 15. 2, 3, 4, 5. Now I see that 3 and negative 5 are integer factors. Those are the ones I'm looking for, and I want the pair that adds up to positive 2. So I'm going to make a third column where I add the two factors together, and I'll try to find the column that adds to 2. So I'm going to go back to y equals, and I'm going to toggle down using my down arrow key to y2, and I want to add the two columns that I have. So the first column was called x, plus the second column was y1. To get y1, I go to vars. I use my right arrow key to go to y vars. I hit enter to get the y1, and then I choose the y1 is the one I want, and so I hit enter again, and that puts it in there. And now when I go back to second table, you'll see that, for instance, 1 and negative 15 are factors of negative 15, and they add to negative 14. And I'm interested in one that adds to positive 2, and glancing down I see that this row does. So the two factors I'm interested in are 5 and negative 3. I use those two factors to rewrite my original polynomial as a 4-term polynomial, and then I would like to factor it by grouping. So that 2 just stays on the outside, and I'm going to rewrite my polynomial as 5x squared. But instead of writing 2x, I'm going to write plus 5x minus 3x. That's just a different way to write 2x, but it's going to help us because it's going to end up then giving me common factors when I factor by grouping. So let's factor this by grouping. Remember, when I have 4 terms, I can group 2 terms together and factor at the greatest common factor. I'm going to need 2 sets of parentheses now. So I'm going to factor a 5x out of the first piece, and I'll be left with x plus 1. Because 5x times x will get me back to 5x squared, and 5x times 1 will get me back to 5x. Then I need to subtract from that. I'm going to factor at the greatest common factor I have here, which is a minus 3. What am I left with? If I factor a negative 3 out of a negative 3x, I'm left with an x. And if I factor a negative 3 out of a negative 3, I'm left with positive 1. Because when I multiply the negative 3 back in, I will get back to negative 3x plus 3. And let's end my parentheses. I don't think I did need an extra one. And now I'm able to factor the x plus 1 out. I have a 5x with an x plus 1 and a negative 3 with an x plus 1, and so I can factor an x plus 1 out of each of those terms. That's the last step in the factoring by grouping. So I have a factor of x plus 1 in both. I'm factoring that out, and then I write what's left. In the first term, when I factor out an x plus 1, I'm going to be left with a 5x. And in the second term, when I factor an x plus 1, I'm going to be left with a minus 3. And I have completely factored this polynomial. Let's go enter that and see how that looks. So I have a 2, I have an x plus 1, and I have a 5x minus 3. Check my answer. Looks great. I hope this helps you factor.